Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another installment of Media Post webinar series. I'm Mike Winkleman, Content Director for Bespoke by Media Post, and we have a great presentation for you all today put together by our friends at Nativo. Media Post webinars bring together the media, marketing, and advertising community to learn more about methodologies and technologies that make effective business possible across a variety of categories, brought to you by our industry's top solutions providers, marketers, and practitioners. Leading today's webinar will be Erin Tai, Head of Content Production at Nativo. Erin's presentation is titled Bridging the Gap Between Awareness and Action, Using Branded Content to Influence Decision-Making. With a focus on the ways in which companies can deliver a personalized experience that pulls together the right content to the right customer at the right time, Erin will use 3 core consumer profiles, as well as exclusive research and case studies, to tee up some specific advice on how to tailor tone and format in order to best influence consumer decision-making. This is great, important, and incredibly relevant information, and I, for one, have been looking forward to hearing what Erin is going to tell us. Before we get started, just a reminder, after the presentation, we'll have some time for a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation in the question box that you'll find in the GoToWebinar interface on the right of your screen. With that, let's bring in Erin to get things going. Erin, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Can you hear me? Okay, great. That was a great intro. Frankly, I feel like I could skip part of the presentation. That was very comprehensive. As Mike said, my name is Erin Tai, and I am Head of Content Production at Nativo. If you don't know who Nativo is, we actually hold the patents on native advertising. And if you don't know what native advertising is, it's essentially branded content that is formatted to match the aesthetic and function of the environment in which it appears. So the idea is that the advertising feels native to the space in which a consumer is coming across it. So our technology enables native advertising on over 2,000 publisher sites, and that allows content marketers to distribute their branded content on high quality placements and to do so at scale. And Nativo works with hundreds of top brands every year, creating, distributing, optimizing content across that publisher network. And that gives us a lot of data and insights around what works and what doesn't work out there in the real world. As Mike said, today we're going to specifically focus though on the challenges of mid-funnel marketing and what it looks like to bridge the gap between upper funnel efforts and lower funnel conversion. A lot happens in between a consumer learning your name and deciding to spend their money with you. And that journey is distinct for each person. It's as distinct for each person as they are from one another. So our agenda today includes, we're going to share some recent research findings that will help you define who are you marketing to. We're going to review specific content recommendations on how those consumers want to be spoken to. And we'll finish with why branded content is so uniquely suited to bridge that tricky gap between the upper and lower funnel. So first, why did we think mid-funnel was a topic worth dedicating an entire webinar to, as it is clearly not where the majority of money is going? According to a CMO study, 97% of marketing budgets are spent at the top of the funnel. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? These tactics, they're big, they're flashy, they're eye-catching. They are often more traditional mediums, think TV, print, celebrity endorsements, etc. And that combination of premium production and guaranteed reach typically translates to expensive. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of the budget is earmarked for the upper funnel. It's also worth noting as well that compared to mid-funnel tactics, upper funnel, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's more simple to measure, and the primary goal, awareness, it feels a little bit easier to attain. But you spend all this money on the upper funnel, and then something happens. Only 7% of salespeople say the leads they get from all of those efforts and all of that money spent are actually valuable to them. And that's a problem, right? Like, it's especially a really big problem when you consider that marketing departments have been, for a number of years now, coming under increasing scrutiny to prove ROI on the work that they do. So something's happening in the mid-funnel. Consumers are losing their way, or maybe the better thing to say is that brands are losing their consumers in that mid-funnel. And this might help indicate what's being kind of overlooked in this conversation. 2/3 of the journey that consumers are taking, industry agnostic, is done without talking to anybody from your company. So put this another way, by the time a consumer reappears as a lower funnel lead on your radar, they have already done the majority of their research and decision making. And that includes the customers who never reappear on your radar because the decision ultimately went against you and you had no idea that they were really even in your pipeline. But these middle funnel prospects, they are prime candidates for targeting marketing campaigns. The time and effort spent on mid-funnel marketing, it's highly optimized. These prospects, they're already in your buying funnel. They're actively considering solutions in your space. They simply haven't really made that purchasing decision yet. But the mid-funnel is where that decision making happens, but we're really not paying that much attention to it necessarily. And why is that? And we have a couple of theories. The first, as we kind of mentioned before, the mid-funnel is complicated. It is doing multiple duties all at the same time, right? You have to get a user from awareness initially to consideration, you're moving on to evaluation, and then on meaningfully towards action. But what moves one consumer down that path might be completely different for a different reader. And that's why top of the funnel is a lot easier in that respect. You're just moving people from not being aware of who you are to being aware. It's not as complex and it's a lot easier to measure. But if your brand is really, really heavily and or solely focused on the upper funnel and you are not in the mid funnel during that phase of the journey, you're missing out on being considered in the purchase decision process. You are taking yourself right out of the game. So it's really, really important that brands are active in the mid funnel. So we've established there is a gap. There is a disconnect, 97% spend, 7% value. How do we bridge that gap between the top of the funnel, AKA leads, to the bottom of the funnel, AKA sales? And the answer is that some of that marketing budget has to fill this gap in order to nurture leads in the mid funnel. As we just kind of talked about, however, the mid funnel is complex. Your consumers are unique. They do not all value the same things. They do not all move at the same pace, and you cannot find them all in the same location. And that means you have to cast a pretty wide net, and you have to account for a multitude of variables. This is where branded content comes in. So how does branded content be the hero here and help make this a smooth road for your customers, and you can bridge them all the way from awareness down to conversion? Branded content, I like to think of it as a blank canvas, particularly article, but really anything. It is a blank canvas for storytelling. And depending on how you produce your branded content, it has a unique ability to address really every stage of the customer journey. And it does so in a way that is highly customizable for different consumer segments and priorities. We know this sort of mid-stage, it's fundamentally focused on nurturing leads as they begin to determine for themselves, what do they value? What do you have to offer? What are they really looking for? But all of your customers are coming to this conversation with their own needs, expectations, biases, etc. But this is what's really incredible to me as a content nerd about branded content, is that it gives you the chance for the customer to tell you what they're interested in. They get to make their own choice about how they want to engage with you and your brand and opt in before the hard sell ever takes place. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Let's say you are a weight loss brand and you're running a piece of content on how to make lasting nutritional changes in the new year. Within that article, you feature 4 distinct click-out opportunities. Different opportunities for readers to continue that learning journey, to go through to your site and explore your various offerings. And the CTAs, as I mentioned, are distinct. So one goes to before and after stories of people who've used your product and had great success with it. And the second goes to nutrition plans. Here are kind of some meal plans that will really help you achieve those goals, your nutritional goals. A third is portion control products. We're going to really help you with those goals. And finally, the fourth one is going to go to membership solutions. These are our solutions. These are our plans. this is kind of what we have to offer you in terms of partnership. The reader, by virtue of how they choose to continue that engagement journey, is qualifying themselves. So the way they interact with those distinct click-out opportunities, or it could be an interactive element within your article. It doesn't have to be click-out opportunities, but that engagement creates a roadmap for you. It's telling you what's most important to them, what is the strongest motivator for conversion. They're essentially telling you, this is how I want to be nurtured. Like, this is what I care about. And there's a real payoff to getting that nurturing right. Customers who were nurtured during the journey spend an average of 47% more than people who converted, but they weren't nurtured in the mid-funnel. So there is tangible ROI on focusing on that nurturing process in the mid-funnel. So I hope I have just persuaded you that the mid-funnel, it is worth the effort, it is worth your time, it is where so much of the magic happens. And now I want to share some really interesting research findings that Nativo did that make it a little bit easier for us as marketers to navigate that space. So Nativo partnered with SMS Research to look into the consumer journey, the customer journey rather, across 5 very distinct verticals. We looked into auto, finance, B2B, travel, and then also healthcare and pharma. And what we found coming out of that was that there are essentially 3 major overarching consumer segments that can be addressed really uniquely using content at the mid-funnel stage. The first is the overwhelmed consumer. So think of this person as the Uber passenger. There will be an auto theme to these profiles. So this one is our Uber passenger. They don't know the rules of the road. They lack confidence. They are easily stressed. They're anxious about making decisions, and they rely heavily on the expertise of others. This is an audience that kind of wants to be told what to do. The second consumer segment that we identified is the sensible consumer. And we call these people, they're like trusty Volvos. They are practical, they are reliable, they're loyal to brands that provide value to them. And they really kind of already understand the lay of the land for the most part and how to navigate it. They have a pretty educated grasp of their purchase options, and they have the purchasing power to back that up. They tend to be pretty analytical in their approach. And then the final and third segment here is the early adopter consumer. This consumer is the Tesla driver. They are pioneers, they are experts, they are highly motivated to purchase. They're already, for the most part, really educated about their options in the market, and they have a solid understanding of the product offerings. This consumer is looking for that final tipping point. They want to get under the hood. When I think of this consumer, I think of, we all have that one friend who has the new iPhone the day it comes out. Like, that's kind of how I think about this person. They're on it and they know all the features. They're educated and they're willing to put money behind a product that they really believe in, and also for the sake of kind of being that early adopter as well. So we have our 3 consumer segments. We've outlined them for you. Let's dive into what it means to tailor content to each of these groups in order to bridge that gap from awareness to actions. So, and this comes sometimes as an issue when we get into branded content, in that you don't always know before you produce your content and before you send it out into the world who is reading it and who you're talking to. But as I mentioned in that weight loss article example earlier, if you distribute the right content and with the right variables, and you pay attention to the engagement trends of your content, your readers will choose their own journey, so to speak, and they will qualify themselves. They are going to tell you who they are based on the content they gravitate towards, how they engage with it, and how they engage going on from that content as well. So you always have the opportunity to launch a bunch of content and figure it out and test and learn and optimize as you go. And then just a couple more stats just to really drive home why the mid-funnel is the place to be. The benefits of nurturing leads: you get 50% more higher sales ready leads and at a 33% lower cost. So just to set the stage here. Now let's dive into the types of content that each of these segments really needs along their journey. Okay, going back to the overwhelmed consumer. This is a stressed, anxious Uber passenger. This person needs content that helps them feel less anxious and eases their stress. So their need is, they want to feel reassured, they want to be actively guided, and they want to feel empowered in their decision making. And in some instances, that means that you kind of made it for them, but they feel good about that. And the tone you want to use with this audience, it's clear, straight. Remember, they get overwhelmed really easily. It's supportive, like emotionally supportive, because they are stressed, and it's authoritative. They kind of want to be told what to do. They're seeking guidance, so you need to be very clear that you know what you're talking about, and when you tell them to do or buy or consider or read a certain thing, you're doing it for a really good reason. So what are the best types of content? Let's dig into formats a little bit more and how that translates to sort of producing content. So the best types of content in this instance, they include a lot of general education. So think, for example, 101 guides. Remember, they don't really know the rules of the road. So 101 guides, they're a great introductory content piece that helps them understand the basic lay of the land, the basic principles, the basic information to feel good about making a decision. You're kind of providing that broader context that makes them feel a little bit like, I know a little bit more about what I'm doing. This decision doesn't exist in a vacuum. Checklists. Again, they're stressed, overwhelmed. They're kind of like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start. Checklists are excellent for this audience because they do so much of the heavy lifting on behalf of your consumer. You're saying to them, here's what you need to think about. Here are the things you should be considering. Here's all the things you have to do before you make this decision. Here's what you should be thinking about in your brain as you're considering buying this product or signing up for this solution. You are doing so much of the thinking for them before they make that choice. So this is a really, really great format. It's also a super digestible format. So we find a lot with content that's structured this way where it's copy light and it's usually assigned like numbers or bullets. It's so easy to read. So if they're stressed out and a little overwhelmed, making content in a very digestible form is an excellent idea. It really encourages them to stick with your content and get through to the bottom of the page or to the end of the slideshow or the video, what have you. And then finally, how-tos. They lack confidence, right? So a how-to article, a video, a training session that provides for these consumers really practical and detailed advice that they need in order to feel a little bit more confident about making that decision. This is perhaps the most of all of them straightforward. Let us help you. Here is what you do, right? You are straight up saying how to do this. It's a really, really great format for this audience. For anybody who's seeking some guidance, a how-to is really where it's at. And I'm going to talk about a case study now. So this was a partnership Nativo did with GNC, and they're a really great example of this because they recognized that new consumers were really hesitant about their knowledge on nutrition and supplements, which I don't think should surprise really anybody on this call because it is an intensely saturated market and it has become remarkably more so in like the last 5 to 10 years. It is packed full of new products, of opinions, of influencers. There is so much information out there to consume about supplements, what they do for you, which ones are right for you. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. So consumers in this space are actively seeking guidance. They want you to tell them this one is good for you. So GNC really focused on educational content. They really focused on that kind of foundational information, and they got amazing results distributing with us. So you can see that we got 122,000 distributed store visits. Of those visits, it was a 90% average in-store conversion, which is crazy. And then also there was a $45 average basket purchase. So if we circle back around to that stat I shared earlier, nurtured leads spend on average 47% more because they're walking into that store and they're like, I know what I need. I know what I'm looking for. I'm not going to start reading the back of these boxes and bottles and go, you know what? This is a lot. I think I'm just going to go to Starbucks, right? Like they feel empowered. They know what they're looking for. And also, I think when you come to those situations and you kind of have a bit of a background and knowledge, it's more exciting. You know, when you find the ingredients, the products, the formulas that you kind of have been reading about, you're like, ooh, yes, I read about, I know about this. Like I'm gonna get this one, take this one home. All right, moving gears. The sensible consumer. So the trusty Volvo, as we call them, they understand their needs. They have a good understanding of what they're looking for. They're more analytical than our kind of overwhelmed consumer. And content for them is a little bit more about weighing pros and cons. So the tone that you want to strike with this audience in particular is candid. You're being honest, straightforward. You want to be practical. and you also still want to be educational. So what does that mean if you translate to content formats? So the first one I'd recommend would be infographics. Dynamic infographics with graphic visuals, with charts, graphic data, and key takeaways. You present a lot of information quickly and clearly for this group to analyze. They're not kind of waffling about. They know the types of information they need to make their decision, and you get to fit a lot of key takeaways into a fairly copy light format often when you go with something super, super visual like that. And you can also communicate a lot of key takeaways and not sacrifice any of your storytelling, because the visuals are doing a lot of that heavy lifting for you. We also know that data visuals, they improve cognition as well. So I know that's true for me. Reading about it and then seeing a chart really helps compound the takeaway. And improved cognition leads to deeper understanding. And that's what this user is very specifically looking for. They kind of know, they really want to know better. So infographics are a great format for them. Then we have product comparisons. These are a great way to engage the user segment. As we said, they're analytical, they're practical. They really want to understand the benefits of a specific brand, and then more specifically their products, right? And they want to understand how that compares to the market as a whole. They want that contextualized so that they feel really sure in their decision. That's paramount. That surety is paramount for this audience. So comparisons between products and solutions is so helpful because you're providing all the context for them, and you're also controlling the contrast. So you get to kind of compare multiple products and somehow they all come out looking great, right? It's just about whichever one is the most right for that particular reader. And then there is educational videos and webinars. These are a great vehicle to deliver product comparisons in as well. And they also open up a forum for deeper discussion, especially something like a webinar. And we know consumers often also appreciate variety, especially if multiple touch points are needed in that mid funnel. So amplifying a mix of mediums is a great move. And we know this audience, like we said, they're analytical, they're sensible, they're seeking information. There's a really good chance that they're going to multiple resources. So meeting them with multiple sort of different formats is a great way to engage their attention and retain it as well. And then finally for this audience, reviews. This won't be a shock. The sensible consumer is all about reliability. And there was a study from Social Media Today and that found that almost 2/3 of shoppers think online reviews are an essential part of their decision-making process. So reviews are particularly impactful at this stage, and they kind of serve as social and peer proof as to what makes a brand or product look trustworthy, and it's really proven to drive sales. So this is also an excellent, excellent format. The case study for this one is Bose. So Bose, I think everyone probably knows them, and they understand that for many people, their products are an investment and or a splurge or like a treat for somebody special. They're premium products, and so they come with a premium price tag. And so for a sensible consumer, investing this kind of money means they're going to do their homework first, right? They want to understand what sets these products apart, and that they're ultimately selecting the one that actually is the best fit for their needs. So Bose distributed this collection, or selection rather, of tailored gift guides and around different holidays. I think the one in the example here is Mother's Day, and it showcased a number of their different products, and it included a bunch of really beautiful high-res imagery so you could kind of get a really great visual on each product. And it called out all the key benefits and all the key differences between the products. And we also aligned each product with a particular kind of mom, as much as you can segment that category, to kind of make it super, super easy and help shape that consideration a little bit further. And we saw super strong engagement, as you can see, and even stronger continued action. So it was 3.9 million impressions, 71 seconds over a minute was spent with the content on average, and we had an incredibly strong CTA rate of 7.69%. So this is telling us this content gave them all the information they needed to make the decision. When they're clicking through, it's not for more information, it's to buy your product, right? Like those clickouts were go to the product page. We were serving them enough and a comprehensive enough amount of information that they're like, let's do this, like I'm ready to commit. Finally, the early adopter consumer. So this Tesla driver, they're highly motivated. They want to be looked at and kind of recognized really as the expert that they are. They are not your average consumer. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're looking for. So the tone that you want to strike with them is technical. Don't be afraid to be technical, be expert, and also be passionate. Reflect that back at them because they are really passionate about those verticals in which they are an early adopter. So content that resonates with them, personalized content is a great place to start. This consumer group likes to feel a little bit special. They like their expertise to be acknowledged, and they like a personalized touch. So you can include things like special offers and loyalty programs. They also appreciate under the hood product demos. So they know the benefits, they're ready to purchase, they just want to get under the hood and review the advanced details. So these kind of really in-depth, a little bit more expert level product demos and even reviews as well, they're helpful for this user. They care about what their purchases represent to others. And so they really want to know everything about it before they purchase. And the case study for here is with Mazda. So Mazda partnered with Nativo to reach their active shopper segments, and they chose to embed hotspots and product demos in order to give users a much closer look, an advanced under the hood product demo that they could kind of lead themselves. And in doing so, Mazda doubled their engagement, which was remarkable. They had these really detailed interior and exterior product demos that drove like almost 300 clicks, which told Mazda that their mid-funnel audience is drawn to learning about specific features, right? Like it's not just about paint color for this audience. It's very, very specific features. And because of all this immersive content, Mazda was able to drive 124% higher average time on content and a 35% higher CTR rate and a 31% higher conversion rate. So it really speaks to the power of when you find those people who care about the nitty-gritty of your product, give it to them because it's going to drive a lot stronger interaction for you. Okay, so I hope this was useful to you. We got to the Q&A portion, and I hope it also created some new thoughts around how to tackle the mid-funnel for your company. Branded content, in my opinion, as I said, I'm a content nerd, it's one of the most versatile and powerful tools in a marketer's arsenal, any marketer's arsenal. And everything in that toolkit, from tone to format to CTAs to topic to interactive elements, is an opportunity to tailor your messaging, to deepen your resonance, and to influence the consumer decision making. So if you want to influence consumer decision making, the mid-funnel is where you need to be, and branded content is how you need to do it. With that.
Okay, all right, Erin, that was great. As I mentioned earlier, we have some time now for a few questions for the audience, and feel free to keep adding questions to the question box on the control panel, and we'll keep an eye on that and keep answering them as we go through here. A quick reminder, also a copy of today's recording of the webinar will be sent to all of you via email later today, so keep an eye out for that. Erin, we also had a question about whether or not people can get a copy of the deck. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's the first question. Is credibility and trust an issue when it comes to branded content?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the answer is nuanced here because it depends in part on which vertical that you occupy as a brand. But ultimately, I would say that the answer lies in providing value. Bless you. So we live in the era of intelligent consumers, right? Like at this point, everyone kind of knows what's going on. Advertising is a part of our daily life. And now they expect advertising, but they also expect a value exchange. So if your branded content is solely focused on what you want from them, you're going to lose that trust. If there's not a real value exchange, you will lose that trust and you will lose that credibility. So you have to provide value. And I would say that value, it's not always the classic definition like tips or discounts. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to qualify. So if you think about our anxious, overwhelmed consumer, the value for them isn't necessarily tips, but it's reassurance. It's that emotional reassurance that they're making the right decision. I would also say it depends on how branded your content is. So there's obviously a whole spectrum. You could be very, very light-handed or if not unbranded with your content, and you can go all the way to like a super heavily branded content. And that's where I would pull back that point about verticals. Like if you're a chocolate chip brand and the article is like great holiday snacks and you want to surround it with offer messaging and banners, go ahead and do that, right? People are like, yeah, okay, I probably do need this, whatever. It's a holiday snack article. We had a client at Nativo who was a pharmaceutical brand who existed in a really, really stigmatized and sensitive space. And we found when we tested surrounding that with a lot of branded messaging and doing no surrounded banners, branded banners, the engagement dropped off a cliff when it was surrounded by branded messaging. Like it just immediately, you lost trust with your consumer. And again, if it was a snack recipe article, I don't think they would have cared as much, but this was sensitive. So it needed a much lighter touch when it comes to branding. And I'd say that the final piece on this, not to bang on about it, but you also do have the option to, as I mentioned before in the presentation, rely on third-party credibility. So we talked about reviews and product demos. That is a great way of borrowing equity and credibility from a source outside yourself. So like Nativo, for example, we have an offering called Curated Quotes, where you would run an article that's your own branded content. You control the messaging, the copy, everything. And we lace that, we intersperse quotes throughout from really credible publishers. So let's say you're a Mazda, it might be Auto Magazine, Car and Driver, and we seed these quotes, like positive quotes throughout, and it just adds that kind of bolster of like, oh, okay, like yes, the brand's telling me they're great, but so is Car and Driver, right? So that's another tool if you're worried a little bit about credibility. So a long answer, but I think there's a whole spectrum there of things to consider.
That was a great answer, incredibly comprehensive. So here's another more detailed question. Can you please share how Nativo determines what types of content resonate most with each target segment?
Determined from this study or determined, I guess, can you repeat the question to make sure I know what you...
Yeah, sure. Can you please share how Nativo determines what type of content resonates most with each target segment? So in other words, I think what they're saying here is that when you divided it into each of the 3 target segments, how do you determine which, if you have a piece of content, which segment it goes with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, it's historical performance, right? So I think we have, as we mentioned before, we work with hundreds of brands. So we have a lot of data to pull from. And we know that if you kind of start with the end goal, right? So if you know a consumer is unsure and uneducated and they're looking for guidance, lean into educational content. And that might take how-to guides, 101 checklist, right? It's a little bit of logic there, but it's also, like I said, historical performance. And I do also want to say, these are not incredibly strict in the sense that if you have a great Q&A and you want to run it for a really educated early adopter consumer, you can absolutely do that. That's when you might tailor your tone. And you might get into much more granular questions or much more detailed checklists. But those formats really work for whatever audience you want to do. There's just some very fundamental best practices around what do they need to get out of it and how do you best accomplish that. Hopefully that made sense.
And well, this is, and a follow-up to that, which is a little more granular in terms of looking through that. Someone's asking here, would you provide more detail on the difference between the how-to content for the Uber passenger and the educational video content for the trusty Volvo? You know, how do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think educational content runs a spectrum because realistically, the content for all 3 of these segments is educational. The difference is the degree of detail that you include. So I would say a how-to, and again, you can tailor a how-to for each of these audiences, but a how-to fundamentally tend to be fairly high level and simple. It is also the nature of the tone that you're using. A how-to me is quite authoritative. You are telling somebody, this is how you do this thing. Whereas an educational video can be a bit more, or a webinar, for example, can be a bit more conversational. You can also focus on content that's a little bit further in that educational journey. So for example, You know, if it was an overwhelmed consumer, it could be, gosh, like the 5 questions you ask before buying a car. Whereas like the educational video would be something like, gosh, I don't even know, like test to put it through on the test drive, or here's a checklist for comparing different vehicles or something like that. There is a lot of overlap between these segments. It's really about how foundational is that information. If you give this audience this information, are they going to go, duh? You know what I mean? Right? Like, so those initial guides, that's people who are like, help me, I'm overwhelmed, I want some guidance. And then the educational sort of how to is a little bit more nitty gritty. Hope that makes sense.
So following up on that a little bit, here's another question that takes maybe one step further. How do you make your branded marketing messages personal? How do you determine who falls into the target segments beyond historical performance, and what is historical performance?
So how do you make content personal? That's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to do that, right? It's every single facet. That's why production is such an interesting and also nuanced field, because you're personalizing it in any number of ways. You know, you're starting out with tone. You're starting out with the topic that you're focused on, the format. So if it's an overwhelmed consumer, you might go a little bit light on copy. Like I said, do a really digestible listicle format. If it is that really practical sort of evaluative consumer, maybe it's like a hotspot and it's something you can kind of go through. The format really makes a difference. You could also do things depending on how you're targeting, how you're like reaching that audience. Obviously that comes into play for personalization as well. And then there's things like even at a very granular creative level. So at Nativo, when we amplify a piece of content, every single piece of content gets 5 to 10 headlines against it and several preview images. And that allows us to figure out what messaging resonates. And sometimes we'll do things like we'll qualify and speak to a very specific consumer in that headline. So it could be like what C-suite executives need to know about hybrid cloud management. And that's personal, right? Like you're saying, this is for you. This is your information. And the imagery might also reflect that. And you also could do, you know, the click out opportunities. It might be high level thought leadership really tailored, for example, to that C-suite audience. So the reality is the tools in your arsenal are myriad and infinite when it comes to personalizing that content. I think the most important piece of this is actually test and learn, because it's impossible to start that and be like, I know exactly what these people need. Set out a learning agenda for yourself and figure out, okay, what formats are resonating, what topics, what keywords, what images, what click out opportunities, and then tailor your production to match that. That's the best way I think you can make that content personalized. What was the other question? It was like, how do we evaluate?
Well, the question was really, if you're looking at historical performance, what is historical performance? How do you determine that?
So that would be, there's a number of different ways you can cut that. It could be, so for us, it could be the year-over-year relationship. We have some really long-standing partners, and part of that evaluation is looking at how has engagement with your content evolved over time. But we also look at a vertical, like category level. So we also might go back through historical performances. For example, if it is a healthcare brand, we would look at our partnership year over year, and we'd also look at partnerships across that health space. And it could be over multiple years, or for example, we had a very strange couple of years, and health is a very interesting vertical to analyze historically at present, right? So in that instance, we probably would focus on up to 2020 spring, and then post, and then 2020, and then maybe 2021 is its own separate sort of field. So there's a number of different ways you can cut that, but historically it's kind of looking back through brands in that same space and what performance has looked like.
Okay, so following up on a slightly different angle of what you've been speaking about, with the question, can the same piece of content appeal to different personas, or should you be producing distinct content for each one? And we've kind of been looking at the second half of that, but the first half of it's kind of an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah, I think this is a good one, because it might have sounded when we were going through these personas that content, you need to be producing content specifically against every conceivable persona. And I can imagine you're like looking at your marketing budget or your copywriters and you're like, oh my God, like how much is left? How much time do we have? Like, when are we going to launch, right? And the great thing is that you don't necessarily, you can tailor it in any number of ways. Like in an ideal world, you would be producing content specifically for your audience, but you absolutely do not have to. You can curate any piece of branded content. It's incredibly flexible. You could take one piece of content, and depending how you format that, and maybe even the copy you leave in or take out, the interactive elements that you put in, the click-out opportunities that you put in, you can tailor that to match the specific needs of really any audience. So if you have the budget and the time, it's great always, to tailor your content as much as possible. It is absolutely not necessary. We are big advocates at Nativo of curating content, refreshing your content, and reformatting your content and making it work really hard for you and maximizing that ROI.
Okay, so someone wants to know, can you please share more about customers who spend more time in the mid-funnel? Does branded content help move them through the funnel faster?
I mean, I think what branded content does, it depends, right? Because all of us consumers are different. So if you reach them with exactly the information that they need to make a decision, I would argue that yes, you are catalyzing their decision because you are reaching them. And typically these are targeted campaigns. So you are reaching them and you're nudging them. You're kind of going, hey, like remember that brand you heard about, or remember that page you were looking at, like here's some more information. So in the sense that it is a guided pathway as opposed to just releasing them into the ether, yes, I do think you are catalyzing that process. What was the first part of that question?
Hold on, gotta get back to that one, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Can you please share more about customers who spend more time in the mid-funnel? I guess what types of customers, how you get a customer to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the case I'd make is everyone's in there. There is nobody, I don't think, who goes from awareness to purchase unless it's like a very late night like Instagram impulse buy, and everyone regrets those. So I think literally everybody is in the mid funnel for at least a period of time. And I think everyone's journey is kind of different. So it's kind of hard to sort of blanket statement describe them, but everyone has a consideration process. Like no one's going to learn about a brand or product and just commit to buying, which is why it's so important to being in that mid funnel. It is, in my mind, it is like that is the majority of their funnel in a sense, right? Like that consideration process, that is where all of the conversion, like all of the conversation and persuasion happens. You just have to be there. You really can't neglect it.
Okay. Here's a question in a different direction. What are your favorite resources to stay up to date on content innovation and trends?
Oh,
What do you look for?
Content innovation and trends. In part, like there's certain publishers that I go to who I think do a great job of sort of branded content. At the company, I know we use Brandtail as well to stay on top of sort of branded content. And we'll go through things like, like newsletters and things like Media Post, Ad Week. We do have representatives who attend content and content marketing events as well and kind of come back and share those insights with us. And there's also, we do a lot of research as well with companies like Statista. And that is a little bit less focused on content, but rather what they want from their content and what they care about. And then a lot of it's just like in the wild, anytime I see a really cool immersive content experience, like me and my team, we save it and we share it. We have actually a meeting every month that is just about, it's called We Heart Content. It is just about here's cool things we've seen in the wild, and what that means for us as a team.
Okay, well, here's a different question that is playing back on what you talked about in terms of customer testimonials before. What are your thoughts on using stock photography for customer testimonials instead of using the actual consumer due to a number of constraints? Does this impact your credibility when you're telling the stories?
That's a great question, and I think most likely yes. It depends on how stocky your stock imagery is. If it's woman laughing into a salad, we've all heard that joke, right? Like if it's very clearly stock photos, it's going to serve the purpose of adding visual interest, but it's not going to add necessarily anything persuasive to your story. I think you do also risk emotional disconnect. If you have found quality, non-stocky stock images and you are consistent with the subject that is shown in them, I think you can get away with it. I know sometimes there are regulations or it's just not possible and you kind of have to make do. In that instance, I would say be careful what you pick. Pick the same people throughout. You might even consider steering away from having people in your imagery if there's anything else thematically you can include, but be careful because you don't want there to be emotional disconnect. If they're reading about, let's say, Linda's story, and there are cues in there that say that she is retired, and you have a picture of a woman in her 30s, it's kind of an arresting moment, right? You're going, who is this? And I think the most powerful part of testimonial-led content is the emotional connection. It's creating that bond. It's a very emotionally led tactic, so you do not want to risk that. So I would say overall, real pictures whenever you can get them. Otherwise, be very considered in the stock images that you use.
Okay. Here's an interesting question about accessibility. How important is it to rework branded websites to accommodate readers with disabilities?
I mean, I think incredibly important. I think that's a question, though, that sits to me outside of marketing performance. That's really just about accessibility and equality. You know, nobody should feel like they are invisible and that they are, for whatever reason, they have hurdles to appreciate your product, your solution. I mean, if you want to talk about it from a marketing perspective, I guess if there is genuine risk that due to language barriers or whatever it might be, they're not able to understand the value of your product, then, you know, yes, you should account for that. But I think just in general, we are moving towards a more visible and accessible place for branded content. And so the more people who do it, the better, because once it's the norm, everyone adopts it, right? So yeah, I think it's very important.
So with most of the examples that you've been giving us B2C oriented. Someone's asking, how would a B2B journey marketing approach differ from what you've been talking about?
That's a great question. And I think it's interesting because there are genuinely differences between B2C and B2B. But what I would say is that the people making those B2B decisions are still people. They're still consumers. And I think sometimes in marketing, it is really understandable and easy to get two-dimensional in your demographics and be like, this is a senior IT decision maker, this is an insurance broker, and that is what they do, that is who they are, and to overlook the human element of what it means to educate yourself and consider a product. So I think there is a lot more overlap than generally we like to sort of acknowledge, because it's helpful, right, to have those delineations. I think it depends on the business. However, often for B2B, when those decisions are being made, it's a higher price tag. You're impacting an entire organization. The decision is impacting a team, perhaps. So typically we see that they like a greater volume of content, a greater variety of content. It does differ depending on the vertical in which you sit. But I would say generally your tone is a little bit more jargon heavy, it's a bit more advanced. I would run more content that's more like long form, white paper, case studies, because they're here for that kind of information. No one is going to read a white paper on Doritos, but if it's on, again, your hybrid cloud management software, they're like, okay, right? Like it's a serious burden and there can be a lot of technical know-how. So you can lean into those heavier, denser formats. And I would say also lean into volume, because these are really big decisions being made by an individual or, you know, a suite of individuals.
Okay, so here's one last question. Once the reader has qualified themselves, how do you act on that? What are the ways in which you get them to choose their own adventure?
So I'd say that it's all about optimizing and reacting in real time. which is why it's not always necessary to understand every single bit of your consumer before you produce content or distribute content, because you can optimize. You can revisit content, you can learn things and adjust your strategy going forward. It should never be stagnant. I think this question, though, it's not as much about individual reader behavior as much as it is aggregate reader behavior. So they're telling you what matters to them. So like, I'll give you another example. Let's say you are the San Diego Tourism Board, and you're trying to get people to commit to vacations to come out and visit you next summer, and you don't really know what they care about, right? So you produce 3 articles and you send them out to the world, and one is about food and the dishes and restaurants you can't miss, and one is about music venues, and the third is like outdoor adventures, right? And to start, who's engaging with, like, what are those articles? How are they doing? Like, if you're seeing super high initial engagement, like CTR with food, but low CTA and conversion, what is that telling you? That food is, they're saying that I care about this. This is universally interesting to me, but it's not enough reason for me to come to San Diego. Like, I'm not going to book a flight to try these tacos, but I do want to look at pictures of them, right? Whereas let's say you have the article, it's about outdoor adventures, and it's like an okay CTR, but strong time spent and really strong click-through and conversion. What that is telling you is it's a niche audience, but it's like, this is the type of thing I care about. It's a defined activity I can take my family on. I can click this button to book it. I don't have to plan it. I want to be outside. Maybe, you know, the last year that was a big thing for safety reasons. They're telling you this is what's going to get us to convert. And if you piece these things together as well, you can react in the sense of like, okay, so we know food is a great access point, but it's not a good conversion driver. And we know outdoor activities is like an okay, not everyone wants to read about it, but when they do, they are here, they want to come to San Diego. So you could do a couple of things. You could produce more food content if the focus is a little bit earlier in that mid funnel. You could also diversify your outdoor area, produce more content about outdoor activities or family activities. Like, you could test more. Is it outdoor or is it adventurous things? Is it family or is it individual? Does budgeting impact that? You could also do things like create cross-topical content pieces. So you can talk to both food because it gets them in the door, and then be like, oh, by the way, have you ever wanted to go windsurfing? We also do that, right? So it's all about kind of just constantly checking in with your audience and seeing how they're engaging with your content and then adjusting your approach.
Okay. Well, I think with that, we'll wrap it up for today. Erin, it was really great and really informative, and I think everybody learned a lot, and we'll see what they do with that information. One thing I wanted to mention, if you asked a question and it did not get answered, don't worry about it. The folks at Nativo have received all your questions, and they'll respond to each of you directly after the webinar is over. Thanks again, Erin, and to the audience for some great questions, a lot of them today. And thanks to all of those behind the scenes at Nativo who helped to put all of this together. We hope you found the wealth of information they presented helpful and informative. Stay tuned to MediaPost's website and digital publications in your inbox for more informative webinars that are coming from other valuable MediaPost partners in the weeks and months to come. Thanks so much to all of you for joining today. We'll see you next time. Have a great Thanksgiving and stay safe. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike.